The smell of cinnamon and sugar wafted through the air as Hilda Muller stood frozen at the entrance to the mess hall on December 17, 1944. Snow fell gently outside Camp Tonkawa in Oklahoma, nearly 5,000 miles from her bombed-out apartment in Kiel, Germany. As a captured Nachrichtenhelferin, a female communication auxiliary of the Wehrmacht, she had spent the 3-week journey across the Atlantic preparing herself for the horrors that Nazi propaganda had promised awaited German prisoners in American hands. Instead, the 23-year-old former radio operator found herself staring at a sight that made her question everything she had been taught to believe. "Apple pie," the American mess sergeant announced in broken German, gesturing toward the dessert table, where dozens of golden-brown pastries sat cooling for everyone. What Hilda saw in that moment defied 6 years of indoctrination about American barbarism and scarcity. Her trembling hand reached for the plate being offered to her, real ceramic, not the splintered wooden boards she had expected. The slice of pie was larger than any dessert portion she had seen since before the war began. Steam rose from the perfectly browned crust, and the scent of apples and cinnamon brought tears to her eyes as memories of pre-war Christmases with her family flooded back. "This cannot be real," she whispered to Greta Hoffman, another captured radio operator standing beside her. "They must be showing us this for propaganda photographs. Once the cameras are gone, they will take it all away and beat us." But there were no cameras. Only an increasingly impatient mess sergeant gesturing for her to move forward so the line could continue. As Hilda took her first bite of the warm apple pie, the flavor exploded across her tongue. Real sugar, not the synthetic saccharin substitute she had grown accustomed to, and actual cinnamon, a spice that had disappeared from German shops by 1941. What the young German woman experienced in that moment was more than just a dessert. It was the first crack in an ideological wall that would soon come crumbling down around her and hundreds of other German women who discovered that their captivity in America would reveal a truth no amount of Goebbels' propaganda could have prepared them for the overwhelming casual abundance of their supposed enemy. By 1944, Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda had spent years crafting a specific image of the United States for German citizens. Americans were portrayed as culturally inferior gangsters living in a failing economic system. German newspapers and radio broadcasts regularly featured stories about bread lines in American cities, unemployed workers sleeping on park benches, and a decadent society on the verge of collapse. The famous propaganda film The Enemy Sees You, which Hilda had been required to watch during her Wehrmacht auxiliary training, depicted Americans as wasteful, undisciplined, and ultimately incapable of sustained military effort. The Nazi propaganda machine specifically targeted women with messages that American females lived desperate lives of moral corruption and physical hardship. "Would you want to live as an American woman?" asked one 1942 pamphlet distributed to female auxiliaries. "Their men have abandoned them to poverty. Their children starve while plutocrats feast, and they must sell themselves to survive." The accompanying images showed haggard American women in torn clothing, standing in soup lines during the Depression, images that were nearly a decade old but presented as current reality. When the first contingent of captured Nachrichtenhelferinnen and other female German military personnel began arriving in the United States in mid-1944, they brought these beliefs with them. Most had been captured during the Allied advance through France and Italy, where they had served in communication centers, military hospitals, and administrative positions. Unlike male POWs who had been coming to America since early 1943, female prisoners represented a new challenge for the American military authorities. The decision to house them in special women's sections of existing POW camps was made after considerable debate, with the War Department ultimately deciding that the Geneva Convention protections extended to these women regardless of their exact military status. Camp Tonkawa in Oklahoma became one of 7 primary facilities housing female German prisoners, with approximately 325 women assigned there by December 1944. The camp had been specifically modified to accommodate female prisoners, with separate barracks, medical facilities, and recreational areas. Unlike the propaganda images of barbed wire and guard towers that had filled German newsreels, Camp Tonkawa resembled something closer to a college campus, with neatly arranged wooden buildings, landscaped grounds, and recreational facilities that included a volleyball court and a small library. For women like Hilda Müller, the disconnect between expectation and reality began the moment they arrived on American soil. Margaret Schuler, a 32-year-old former nurse with the 21st Panzer Division, later recorded her initial impressions in a diary that was discovered among her possessions after the war. We were told to expect to be transported in open cattle cars and fed scraps. Instead, they moved us in regular passenger trains with actual upholstered seats. The American guards offered us chewing gum and chocolate bars as if these were ordinary things of no value. I accepted one piece of chocolate, expecting it to be my only taste of such luxury in captivity. Then I watched in astonishment as the young guard pulled out 3 more bars from his pocket and handed them around as if they were nothing special at all. The shock of abundance extended far beyond food. As the women were processed into Camp Tonkawa, each received a toiletry kit that contained items that had become rare luxuries in wartime Germany: a full-sized bar of soap, a tube of toothpaste, a new toothbrush, shampoo, and for those who needed it, feminine hygiene products. Lieselotte Weber, a 27-year-old former signal operator who had been surviving on monthly soap rations the size of a matchbox, broke down in tears when handed her kit. "I thought they were mocking us," she later told camp authorities during an interview conducted in April 1945. "I had not seen a full-size bar of soap in 3 years. My mother had been writing to me that she was making soap from collected cooking grease and lye because there was none to be found in Berlin. Yet here, in the prison camp of our enemy, they handed these items to us as if they were nothing extraordinary." The standard issue clothing provided to the women prisoners represented another shocking revelation. Each woman received 3 sets of cotton undergarments, 2 pairs of shoes, 6 pairs of socks, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, a sweater, and a winter coat. The quantity alone was startling to women who had been limited to clothing ration cards that permitted the purchase of approximately 1 new garment every 4 months in Germany. The quality of the American-made clothing was equally surprising, with sturdy construction and materials that many of the women noted were superior to what had been available in Germany even before wartime rationing. Ingrid Hoffmann, a 19-year-old who had served as an administrative clerk with the Wehrmacht in occupied France, wrote in a letter to her sister, which was never delivered due to wartime mail restrictions but was found in camp records, "They have given me 2 pairs of shoes, 2, one for everyday wear and another for what they call dress occasions. The everyday shoes are sturdier than anything I have worn since before the war. My winter coat is thick wool, lined and with real buttons, not the wooden ones we have been using." When I asked if I would need to return the clothing when issued new items, the American woman looked confused and said, "No, those are yours. There seems to be no shortage of anything here." This initial exposure to material abundance was merely the beginning of what would become a profound psychological journey for the German women at Camp Tonkawa and other POW facilities across America. As the weeks passed, the continuous evidence of American prosperity gradually eroded the beliefs that had been carefully cultivated by years of Nazi propaganda. The revelation came not through political, re-education, or overt propaganda, which the women would have resisted, but through the simple reality of everyday life in America as experienced even within the confines of a prisoner of war camp. Food became the most immediate and visceral challenge to their preconceptions. The standard POW diet, as established under War Department guidelines, provided approximately 3,200 calories per day, an amount that exceeded what most German civilians at home were receiving by 1944. For many of the women, it represented more food than they had seen in years. The menu at Camp Tonkawa typically included eggs and toast for breakfast, a sandwich, and fruit for lunch, and a hot dinner featuring meat, vegetables, and a dessert. Coffee, milk, and fruit juice were available at most meals, items that had become rare luxuries in Germany. Dr. Elizabeth Kruger, a 41-year-old physician who had been captured while serving at a field hospital near Caen, began documenting the changes in the women's health after their arrival at Camp Tonkawa. In her medical log, recovered after the war, she noted, "After 60 days in American captivity, the average weight gain among the women under my care is 7 kilograms. Cases of malnutrition-related amenorrhea have resolved in 65% of the affected women. Skin conditions related to vitamin deficiencies show marked improvement across all age groups. The most striking change is in morale and energy levels, which I must attribute primarily to the dramatic improvement in nutrition. The abundance extended beyond the mess hall. The PX, post-exchange store, accessible to prisoners, revealed an economic reality that directly contradicted everything they had been told about America's supposed scarcity and inequity. Using the small stipend they received for camp work, 80 cents per day for most work assignments, the women could purchase toiletries, candy, cigarettes, writing materials, and small luxury items. The very existence of these products, available in seemingly endless supply, contradicted the image of an America struggling with shortages and rationing. Elsa Bertram, who had worked in the supply office of the 12th SS Panzer Division and now found herself assigned to clerical duties in the camp administration office, wrote in her journal, "Today I visited the camp store for the first time. I stood there unable to move, simply staring at the shelves. They have chocolate, not just one kind, but 5 different varieties. They have cigarettes in colorful packages, not the plain gray ones we have at home when they are available at all. There are women's stockings, hairpins, hand cream, and writing paper with matching envelopes. I thought of my mother standing in line for 4 hours last winter, hoping to purchase a single pair of stockings, only to be told the shop had run out before her turn came. Here, in a store for prisoners, they have more than the finest shops in Hamburg have had for years." Perhaps most disorienting for the German women was the discovery that many of the items they had been carefully saving or doing without entirely in Germany were so commonplace in America that they were routinely discarded. Hannah Kleist, a 25-year-old former radio operator who was assigned to kitchen duty, described her shock at American waste in a letter she attempted to send to her parents. "You would not believe what they throw away here. Bread that is 1 day old goes into garbage cans. I secretly retrieve it sometimes, unable to bear seeing it wasted. But the American kitchen supervisor noticed and told me, 'Don't eat old bread. Hannah, take fresh bread whenever you want it.' As if unlimited bread is the most normal thing in the world. They throw away vegetable peels and meat trimmings that would make precious soup stock at home. The garbage cans behind the kitchen contain more food each day than my entire neighborhood in Düsseldorf might see in a week." As winter settled over Oklahoma, the women experienced another unexpected luxury: abundant heat. The barracks at Camp Tonkawa were kept warm by large coal stoves, with fuel seemingly available without restriction. Compared to the severe rationing of coal in Germany, where civilian households had been limited to increasingly small allocations that left many families huddling in a single heated room. The casual American attitude toward heating fuel represented yet another shock. Gerda Weiss, a 34-year-old former administrative clerk with the Luftwaffe, noted in her diary, "The Americans seem to heat the entire building regardless of cost. When I mentioned to the guard that perhaps the heating could be reduced to conserve fuel, he looked at me strangely and said, 'Why would we do that? We have plenty of coal, plenty of coal.' Those words echoed in my mind all day. At home, my parents write that they are burning furniture to stay warm because their coal ration lasts only 10 days each month. Here in the land our leaders told us was facing economic collapse. They heat empty rooms simply because they can. The casual American attitude toward what Germans considered precious resources extended to water usage as well. The camp provided shower facilities with hot water available daily, a luxury beyond imagination for many of the women who had been limited to weekly bathing with carefully measured water rations in many German cities. The laundry facilities, with large washing machines and abundant soap powder, represented another revelation. Traudl Schröder, a 28-year-old who had served as an aide to a Wehrmacht general in Paris, described her first encounter with American laundering practices. They wash everything with machines, using more soap for a single load than my family would be allocated for a month. Sheets are changed weekly and washed, even when they hardly seem used. At home, we have been reusing bath water for laundry, then using the laundry water to clean floors because soap has been so scarce. Here, they use fresh water and new soap for everything. When I tried to explain our methods of conservation to the American woman supervising the laundry, she laughed and said, "Honey, we're not short of soap or water here." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The revelation of American abundance was not limited to material goods. The women also discovered a casual prosperity among ordinary American personnel that contradicted the image of economic class divisions they had been taught to expect. The guards, secretaries, cooks, and maintenance workers they encountered, people who would be considered working class, displayed a standard of living that seemed luxurious by German standards. Frieda Schultz, a nurse who had served with the 7th Field Hospital before her capture in Italy, observed in her diary, "The young American girl who works in the camp office as a typist arrived today wearing a coat with a fur collar. Her shoes are leather with a small heel, not the wooden-soled ones we have had to wear in Germany. She carried a leather handbag and wore lipstick and silk stockings. This is not an officer or a rich person's daughter, just an ordinary office worker." She mentioned casually that she owns an automobile, which she drives to work each day. In Germany, only the most senior officials have access to private vehicles now, and this girl speaks of it as if it is nothing unusual. Either this is an elaborate deception staged for our benefit, or everything we have been told about American society is a lie. As the German women experienced month after month of this material abundance, their psychological resistance began to crumble. For many, the process was painful, forcing them to reconsider not just their views of America, but the entire framework of beliefs they had built their lives around. The cognitive dissonance was particularly acute for those who had been the most devoted to Nazi ideology. Margaret Schultz, a 30-year-old former member of the BDM, Bund Deutscher Mädel, the female branch of the Hitler Youth, who had risen to become a district leader before volunteering for Wehrmacht service, described her psychological struggle in a personal journal kept hidden from American authorities. "I find myself angry all the time now, but I am no longer certain who deserves my anger. For years I taught the girls in my district that Americans were our inferiors, culturally, racially, economically. I believed it completely. Now I am confronted daily with evidence that we were wrong. The abundance here cannot be faked. It is too consistent, too casual, too widespread. If we were wrong about this, what else might we have been wrong about? These thoughts feel like treason, but I cannot escape them. By the spring of 1945, as news of Germany's increasingly desperate military situation reached the camp through official announcements and radio reports, the women's reassessment of American capabilities took on new dimensions. The casual prosperity they witnessed daily now translated into a growing realization of America's staggering industrial capacity and what it meant for Germany's prospects in the war. Ilse Weber, a 29-year-old who had worked in munitions production before being drafted into the Wehrmacht Auxiliary Forces, wrote in a letter to a fellow prisoner who had been transferred to another camp, "I now understand why we cannot win this war. It is not just a matter of soldiers and battles." The American girl who delivers mail to our camp mentioned that her brother works in a factory that produces aircraft engines. She said this factory alone makes more engines each month than we made at the entire Junkers Works, where I was employed for 2 years. At first, I thought she was exaggerating, but I have since learned that America has dozens of such factories. How can Germany compete with this? We are fighting a nation that can produce more in a single city than our entire country can make in a year. The evidence of American production capacity became increasingly difficult to ignore as the women observed the constant flow of new vehicles, equipment, and supplies into even their relatively small and isolated POW camp. Emma Hoffman, who worked in the camp administrative office filing requisition forms, noted, "They order supplies like we might order a cup of coffee, casually, expecting immediate fulfillment, expressing mild surprise if something takes more than a few days to arrive. I have seen them requisition 20 new typewriters simply because the current models were 2 years old. At headquarters in Berlin, we were repairing typewriters that were 15 years old because no new ones were available. They replaced light bulbs at the first flicker rather than waiting for them to burn out completely, as we did at home. Every order form, every casual replacement of serviceable equipment tells the story of a nation drowning in industrial output. Perhaps the most profound evidence of American abundance came not from official supplies, but from the personal packages that American personnel received from home. When the camp's guards and staff opened care packages from their families, the contents revealed a civilian economy largely untouched by wartime shortages. Homemade cookies, candies, photographs, magazines, and store-bought items arrived in numbers that seemed impossible to the German women who knew that their own families at home were struggling to secure the most basic necessities. Lotte Müller, a 20-year-old former administrative clerk, described watching an American guard open a package from his mother. Inside was a hand-knitted sweater, 3 packages of cookies, chocolate bars, cigarettes, a new wallet, and several magazines. He looked at it all with mild interest, then offered the cookies to everyone nearby, including us prisoners. I took one cookie, unable to believe he would share so casually. The guard then mentioned that his mother sends such packages every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks? My family in Dresden has not seen chocolate in over a year, and this young man receives it in quantities he can share with prisoners without a second thought. I bit into the cookie and had to look away so he would not see my tears. The contrast between the prisoners' new reality and the situation they knew their families faced at home became increasingly painful as 1945 progressed. Letters from Germany, heavily censored but still conveying the desperate conditions, described food rations dropping to below 1,000 calories per day in many cities, fuel completely unavailable for civilian use, and clothing so scarce that people were unraveling old garments to re-knit the yarn into new items. Meanwhile, the women in American captivity were experiencing a standard of living superior to what many of them had known even before the war. Helga Schmidt, a 36-year-old former nurse, wrote in her diary, "The greatest cruelty of our captivity is not any mistreatment by the Americans. There has been none, but the knowledge that we prisoners are living better than our own children and parents at home. Today they served us roast beef for dinner with potatoes, green beans, and apple cobbler for dessert. I ate while thinking of my daughter's last letter, where she mentioned being excited to receive a single egg for her birthday." The abundance here feels like a personal accusation, though I know that is irrational. The Americans are not being kind to torment us. This is simply how they live. By mid-1945, with Germany's military collapse increasingly evident, the psychological transformation of many of the women had progressed from initial shock to a more complex reckoning with the implications of what they were witnessing. For some, the confrontation with American abundance triggered a complete reevaluation of their political beliefs. For others, it produced a more focused anger at the German leadership that had so thoroughly misled them about the nature of their enemy, and by extension, the possibility of German victory. Ingrid Hoffmann, who had been among the most skeptical of the German women when first arriving at Camp Tonkawa, described her evolving perspective in a letter to a friend in another camp. "I have been thinking constantly about what it means that they could lie to us so completely about America. If ordinary American working people live with this kind of abundance, which I can now see with my own eyes they do, then Germany was never fighting from a position of strength, as we were told. We were not the superior civilization bringing order to inferiors. We were a much smaller nation provoking a giant that could bury us in production alone, without ever needing to fire a shot. Understanding this makes me question everything I thought I knew. What was the purpose of this war if not the one we were told? What has Germany sacrificed itself for? The news of Hitler's death and Germany's surrender in May 1945 accelerated this process of reevaluation. With the collapse of the Nazi regime, many women felt free to express thoughts they had kept private, even from each other. The camp authorities noted a marked increase in requests for English lessons, American newspapers, and books about American history and society. What had begun as a shock of material abundance was developing into a more profound curiosity about the system that produced such abundance. Dr. Anna Weber, a 39-year-old physician who had served with the 23rd Field Hospital, organized a discussion group among the women to try to make sense of their experiences. In her notes from these sessions, she wrote, "We are attempting to understand how a nation so recently suffering from economic depression, as America was in the 1930s, could transform itself so completely in less than a decade. The images we were shown of bread lines and unemployment in American cities were not fabrications. They existed. Yet somehow this same society now produces so much that abundance reaches even to enemy prisoners in remote camps. This challenges not just our understanding of America, but our fundamental beliefs about economic systems, governance, and social organization. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and observed reality extended beyond material goods to social dynamics as well. The German women had been taught that American society was fundamentally unstable due to racial tensions, class divisions, and the supposedly unnatural role of women. Yet their observations in the camp and interactions with American personnel suggested a more complex reality. Greta Hoffman, who worked in the camp library organizing books and newspapers, noted in her diary, "I have been watching how the Americans interact with each other. The white soldiers and colored soldiers appear to eat in separate areas, so there is clearly some division, but they work together in ways we were told would be impossible in America." The female American staff, nurses, secretaries, telephone operators, move with a confidence I find startling. They drive vehicles, give orders to male subordinates when necessary, and speak their minds in meetings. We were taught that American women were either oppressed housewives or moral degenerates, but these women are neither. They are simply workers, professionals, doing their jobs without drama or special attention. As 1945 progressed into 1946, and repatriation processes began for many of the German POWs, a new anxiety emerged among the women at Camp Tonkawa. Having experienced American abundance, many now dreaded returning to the devastated economy of post-war Germany. Intelligence reports from the occupied zones painted a grim picture of destroyed infrastructure, severe food shortages, and collapsed public services. The irony was acute. These women, who had once feared American captivity, now feared leaving it. Erika Muller, a 26-year-old former radio operator, expressed this anxiety in a conversation recorded by camp authorities during a routine interview. "I'm afraid to go home now. Not because I fear punishment. I was only a communications operator, not involved in any atrocities. I fear the hunger, the cold, the hopelessness that my sister describes in her letters." She writes that in Frankfurt, people are living in cellars beneath bombed buildings, burning books and furniture to cook whatever scraps of food they can find. "After living here, where even prisoners have heated barracks and 3 meals a day, how will I readjust to that reality? It seems a cruel joke that we prisoners have been sheltered from the true consequences of our nation's defeat." This sentiment was common enough that when voluntary repatriation was offered beginning in late 1945, a significant number of the women at Camp Tonkawa and other facilities requested to remain in the United States, if possible. Camp records indicate that approximately 22% of the female German POWs initially declined voluntary repatriation, though most would eventually return to Germany by 1947 as the POW camps were systematically closed. For those who did return to Germany in the immediate post-war period, the contrast between American abundance and European scarcity became even more stark. Lieselotte Weber, who was repatriated to the British occupation zone in October 1945, later wrote to the former camp commander at Tonkawa, "I wish I could adequately describe the shock of returning to Germany after my time in America. The destruction is beyond anything you can imagine unless you see it with your own eyes. But more than the physical destruction, it is the spiritual devastation that is most painful, the knowledge that we believed in a lie, fought for a lie, and sacrificed our nation for a lie. I brought back with me the bar of soap I was given my last day at camp. I have not used it. I keep it as a reminder of a society where such things are ordinary, and as a promise to myself that someday Germany might rebuild itself into a place where abundance is not a miracle but an expectation. The long-term impact of the German women's exposure to American abundance extended far beyond their personal psychological adjustments. Many of these former POWs became influential voices in post-war Germany, particularly during the critical period of economic and political reconstruction. Their first-hand knowledge of American industrial capacity and consumer society shaped their contributions to debates about Germany's future economic model. Dr. Elizabeth Kruger, the physician who had documented the health improvements of women at Camp Tonkawa, returned to Germany to become a public health official in the British occupation zone. In a 1947 policy paper on nutritional standards for the rebuilding nation, she wrote, "Having observed directly the relationship between material abundance and public health outcomes, I must advocate for an economic system that prioritizes production capacity and broad distribution of consumer goods. The lesson of my time in America was not that luxury is necessary, but that when basic goods, soap, textiles, protein sources, fuel, are produced in quantities sufficient for all citizens, the improvements in public health and social stability are dramatic and immediate." Margaret Schultz, the former BDM leader who had struggled so deeply with the contradiction between Nazi propaganda and observed American reality, eventually became a teacher in Hamburg. In her teaching philosophy, documented for a 1954 educational conference, she wrote, "The most important lesson I can offer my students is to question what they are told, especially when it conflicts with observable reality. My own experience of discovering that a society I had been taught to despise was in fact capable of material achievements my own nation could not match taught me the danger of ideological blindness. I teach my students to look first at evidence, not theory, a perspective that places me at odds with some colleagues, but which I consider essential to Germany's democratic future." Perhaps the most profound legacy of the women's experiences came through their influence on the developing concept of the social market economy that would eventually define West Germany's economic miracle. Several former POWs became active in early Christian Democratic Union politics, bringing their first-hand observations of American productivity to discussions about how Germany might rebuild its shattered economy. Emma Hoffman, who had worked in the camp administrative office and had been struck by the casual American attitude toward requisitioning supplies, later worked as an economic researcher for the Ministry of Economic Affairs under Ludwig Erhard. In a 1952 memorandum, she noted, "The American example demonstrates that mass production and mass consumption are not opposing forces but complementary aspects of a functioning modern economy. What I observed as a prisoner was not simply American wealth but American productivity, the capacity to produce everyday items in such quantities that they become affordable to ordinary workers. This stands in stark contrast to the pre-war German emphasis on quality craftsmanship available to few. Our future prosperity depends on adapting the American production model while maintaining German standards of quality. The impact extended to thousands of German households through the personal influence these women exerted on their families and communities. Having experienced American domestic technologies, foods, and consumer habits, many became advocates for modernization in their own homes. Simple American practices they had observed, from food preservation techniques to laundry methods, spread through informal networks of former POWs who maintained contact after the war. Helga Schmidt, who had been so troubled by eating well while her family went hungry, eventually operated a small restaurant in Munich that became known for introducing American-style dishes and serving practices. In a 1956 interview with a local newspaper, she explained, "What impressed me most about American food was not its extravagance, but its practicality. The Americans understood how to create nutritious, satisfying meals with simple ingredients and efficient preparation methods. My experience as a prisoner of war taught me more about cooking than my entire previous life in Germany. And these are the lessons I now share with my customers and employees." By the 1950s, as the German economic miracle gained momentum and consumer goods once again became widely available, the former POWs who had experienced American abundance in 1944 and 45 occupied a unique position in German society. They had seen firsthand what mass production and consumption could achieve, long before most Germans had any direct exposure to American culture or economic practices. Their voices lent authority to the growing consensus that Germany's future lay in embracing aspects of the American economic model while retaining its own cultural identity. Hilda Müller, whose encounter with apple pie on that snowy December day had been the first crack in her ideological wall, later became a successful businesswoman operating an import company that specialized in American household appliances. In a 1962 interview reflecting on her journey from prisoner to entrepreneur, she observed, "What America taught me was not that material goods are the measure of a society's worth. That would be a shallow lesson indeed. What I learned was that abundance need not be the privilege of the few, but can be the everyday reality of the many. The true revolution in my thinking was not about politics, but possibility, the realization that scarcity is not the natural order of things, but a failure of production and distribution." That lesson changed not just my understanding of economics, but my conception of what society can and should provide for its citizens. The story of the German women, POWs, and their encounter with American abundance offers a powerful illustration of how direct experience can shatter even the most carefully constructed ideological beliefs. For these women, the journey from fearful captives to unwitting students of American consumer capitalism unfolded not through propaganda or political re-education, but through the simple daily experience of abundance that contradicted everything they had been taught to believe. The apple pie that Hilda Müller hesitantly tasted on that winter day in Oklahoma was more than just a dessert. It was the first bite of a reality that would eventually help reshape not just her own life, but the economic future of post-war Germany. As the last of these women POWs reached the end of their lives in the early 21st century, their unique historical perspective spanned from the deprivations of wartime Germany to the global consumer society that emerged in the decades following World War II, to the shock of abundance they experienced in American captivity, winter coats freely given, clean sheets changed weekly, and yes, apple pie served to enemy prisoners had revealed a truth about industrial capacity and distribution systems that no amount of ideological resistance could deny. Their journey from disbelief to acceptance to adaptation would become one of the countless human stories that, woven together, formed the complex tapestry of Germany's post-war transformation from devastated fascist state to prosperous democratic republic. In the end, the most powerful weapon America deployed against Nazi ideology may not have been its military might, but its casual, overwhelming abundance, an abundance so complete that it was extended even to the enemy women, who had been taught to hate and fear the very nation that now fed them apple pie.